begin in the name of God, and praise God Almighty. Send blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad. So welcome, ahlan wa sahlan, welcome to everyone that's come. This is the first day of the Islamic Festival Edinburgh. You're welcome. If sisters want to come and sit here, you're very welcome. More chairs are coming. Shall you're welcome. It's the first day of the Islamic Festival Edinburgh. It's been running for a good almost 2 decades. Every year in the festival in Edinburgh in August, the mosque opens its doors and tries to, welcome the wider community in. And in fact, our guest was one of the people that came in many years ago. As part of his journey, maybe we'll come to talk about that. So you never know. You never know. We kind of open our doors and cast the net out, and whoever brings in who he wants. So as part of the fest, the mosque will be open every day for the next 2 weeks. On the weekends we have more things going on. On Saturdays we have we have lectures. Sundays, the next 2 Sundays we have cultural days where food will be served and calligraphy and storytelling and things like that. But today is our first lecture, and we have a very special guest who I'm going to introduce. Paul Yunus Pringle, who is from Edinburgh, which is nice. Someone who's actually born and bred in Edinburgh, and has an interesting story, an interesting journey that he's going to share with us. Lots of challenges in his earlier life, and lots of someone that really felt an urge to kind of explore and find out who he really is, and what it is to be a human, what it is to be a man, what it is to be truly living on this earth, instead of just going through the motions that sometimes we might feel. So that took him on a long journey to different places and different situations. He ended up taking the challenge of some very extreme marathon running in the extreme heat and in the extreme cold. So he did the Marathon des Sables, which is in the Sahara Desert, and then he did the Yukon marathon, which is in Canada. Northern Canada. And he's also written about his experiences. So he has 2 books that I know. I don't know if there's any other books, but which we'll talk about. So he talks a lot about his journey in God of the Wild Places. We're looking at this as we go along. And also he's very interestingly written a book called Hope for the Muslim Alcoholic. Hope for the Muslim Alcoholic. 12-step recovery in the light of Islam, which might strike some people as strange. What are we sitting in a mosque talking about alcohol? But we'll come to that, inshallah. So you're very welcome, Paul. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate your time and coming to see us. Perhaps we could start with maybe just kind of origins, like growing up in Edinburgh in like the 60s and 70s. Yeah. What kind of memories do you have of that time?
Thank you. You're welcome. It's good to be here. Thank you very much. I grew up in Edinburgh. I was born in Edinburgh, and I grew up in a big council estate on the south side of town in Gilman. So it was a very kind of Scottish working class upbringing. I grew up in a religious family. My parents were both devout Catholics. My father sadly died a few weeks ago, but yeah, they were good religious people, and I was brought up, and I feel grateful to have been brought up in a religious context. Although it's not, for me, it wasn't my path. I was brought to a different path. I'm grateful to have been brought up in in a context that was very much believing.
You say that kind of shaped, that is something that you perhaps sow some seeds or something, perhaps were important later on in life.
I think very much so. I mean, I've been obviously, because my father died very recently, I've been thinking a lot about my father and his influence on me, and he was a good man. He was a good, honest, devout, believing man, and that was I'm really kind of feel blessed that I had that example in my early life, things. It wasn't a, I mean, as you know from reading the book, it wasn't a kind of straightforward journey for me at all to Islam. I'm grateful to have had that kind of safety, that secure, safe environment to grow up in, that enabled me to arrive at this place ultimately, you know.
And if we go, I know it just won't be too negative, but we'll talk about the alcohol side first. How does someone kind of fall into that trap, or how does that happen?
It's a very interesting thing, and it's something, you know, you don't have to, if we walk out that door today, we won't have to go very far, and it won't take very long to see the negative effects of alcohol on this society. And it seems to Scotland, for whatever reason, you know, it seems to have a rather unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And as a Muslim, I've been warned in no uncertain terms about the dangers of alcohol. You know, and it's haram for a reason. You know, it's a powerful thing, and it can have a devastating effect on lives. You know, and it certainly did on my own life. I don't think it's a straightforward thing, straightforward question at all. I think people who fall into addiction, in my case it was alcohol. I think having had many years free from alcohol, I stopped drinking alcohol when I was 25 years old, and I'm 60 now, so it's a long time ago. But I can only speak about my own experience, and there was a
Talk about fear, don't you?
there was a kind of a sense of kind of dis-ease, and I was afraid a lot of the time as a child. Just felt afraid, felt ill-equipped to cope with the world, you know. So as soon as I discovered alcohol, which a lot of young, you know, I grew up on a council estate in Edinburgh, and a lot of kids start drinking alcohol very young in that context, you know.
There's a lot of pressure to do it.
It's just there. It's just something that happens, you know, and it's at a ridiculously young age, you know. And for me, what happened is it took that fear away, and I think I think personally that when you're speaking about alcoholism or addictions of any kind, I think what you're talking about is a really intense, an intense version of what the challenge we all face in life. And it's like, how do I live in this world? How do I deal with the temptations and the challenges of living in this world? It's if I don't see when I look back now, and I've been Muslim for a number of years now, and when I look back, what it's given me is a way of living in this world, and a clear path, and a clear. I mean, human beings I don't think, can exist without boundaries. You know, if we watch TV, the media, etc., they'll tell us that it's about expressing yourself, it's about being your true self, and all this stuff. It's all about self, and so there's a kind of resistance to having any kind of boundaries placed on your behaviour.
Boundaries are seen as negative.
But
to escape from.
But for me, what Islam's given me is the boundaries that a human being really needs to live a fully human life in this world, and that's a relief. See, because what the situation I faced before, especially as a young man and a kid, was like I couldn't cope. I couldn't deal with the world I was living in. So for me, I sought relief, and for me that relief came in the form of alcohol. And so if I don't have those boundaries, that guidance, that clear path, it'd be easy for me to slip back into that way of thinking, and to experience that discomfort, that fear, that disease again. And then what's the natural thing someone would do when they find themselves in that situation? Is to seek relief. And for me, that would, the obvious way for me to go would be alcohol. So I'm profoundly grateful that I've been shown a clear path, and I've been shown what those boundaries are, and how to, what's expected of me in this world, and what keeps me safe and content in this world.
I guess this is your latest book is actually, in a sense, reliving that experience and trying to help people who might be in a similar situation, but doing it within Islamic. This is the 12-step recovery in the light of Islam. So it's a myth to think that these issues the Muslim community isn't facing these same issues, whether it be drugs, whether it be alcohol, whether it be addictions. We're just as likely to be. Obviously, we have those boundaries, but we have those guidelines, but it doesn't mean we're going to live by them while we're in the society. So you kind of felt an urge to kind of almost relive that and also make it accessible for Muslims in a way.
That was my hope, yeah. I mean, it kind of emerged. I mean, I've got a long-standing experience, living in the world in trying to, not having to seek that relief and find it. And to me, it was all about submission, submitting to the fact that I couldn't deal with it on my own. I couldn't it wasn't a case of just, okay, don't drink alcohol. Because I was so uncomfortable in the world that I needed to, something to help me through it. So it's not as simple as just telling people, alcohol's haram, don't drink it. I mean, that's true. Alcohol is haram, and I should not drink it. But for somebody who's crossed that line into actual addiction, they might be fully aware that alcohol is haram. They might be fully aware of what it's doing to their health, their morals, their mental health, but can still do nothing about it. So it's about submitting to that fact that I don't have the power personally to deal with it, and I have to submit to Allah, to a higher power, to make that possible.
And that's exactly what the whole point it says, isn't it? Like there's which is so Islamic, really. There's a higher power. I'm powerless to resist this force or this temptation or this. And the first thing is to recognize that your powerlessness and the power, the all powerless, right? The omnipotence of God.
Indeed. And it's as I say, it's a journey all of us have to make, in submission. But there's an urgency for the addict or the alcoholic that intensifies that process, because it's disastrous in the damage that it's doing to an individual. And the reason for actually trying to put that little book together was it was really one of the drivers was meeting with a family a Muslim family who one of the members of that family was drinking alcoholically, and was drinking a lot of alcohol, and it was causing a lot of problems in the family. And I thought, what can I do? What can I do? Because I have some knowledge. How can I put that knowledge to use? I mean, even if one person picks up that book, one Muslim who's who's drinking alcohol and can't stop drinking alcohol. And if that book helps one person, then it'll be worth the whole exercise will have been worthwhile, you know. It's and that's it was meeting that person and seeing the devastation that was being caused, and like, you know, I think we are protected as a community, as a Muslim community. We are protected from the worst of addiction and alcoholism, because we know it's haram. And so there is a degree of protection, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still addiction. If we take addiction more broadly, it is an issue that's affecting our communities, and to just pretend it's not, isn't helping. You know,
what comes through very strongly when going through this book is this, you know, what we call the nafs al-amara. You know, the Quran talks about the lower self, which commands to evil, and when we recognize it in spiritual and also in psychological terms, when you identify that enemy, and maybe that's something that runs through your whole story, really, but identifying that enemy is in the nafs al-amara bis-su, as Allah says, the lower self is it's the imperious self, sometimes it's called, is constantly commands to evil. So that's the lower part. All of us have, all of us are in that. But what you bring, very strongly in the book is identifying it. This is when it comes back. This is where it's going to bite back. This is what it's doing, and I think that's very powerful. Perhaps maybe the 12 point in the Christian side maybe perhaps doesn't identify as strongly.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the 12 big, like the 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program, which was developed in the 1930s in the United States, the final step in the 12-step program says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So the whole purpose of the 12 steps is to bring about a spiritual awakening. And to me, that seemed to parallel that journey from the nafs al-amara to the self at peace. You know, and it's a spiritual awakening, that realization that Allah can do for me what I cannot do for myself. And that one of the things that I've tried to emphasize in that little book is that it seems essential that that nafs, the lower aspect of the nafs, is broken through. I mean, a lot of people have heard the expression hitting rock bottom, and I think that's what it's essential. That's what the rock bottom does. Is it breaks the nafs so that I could become teachable, so that I could be shown. Because the truth, you hear people talk about denial when they're talking about addiction, and the truth gets covered up with all these layers of denial, and that has to be broken, and you have to be left in no doubt as to your brokenness and inability to do for myself what Allah can do for me in terms of recovery and living in this world without the needs to go to these things for relief, you know.
It's nice that there's a Muslim organization that works with prisoners in the US, and they've ordered a whole kind of batch of these books to distribute. So it's really nice, you know.
And it's just like they work a lot with prisoners that are in solitary, you know, and who have found themselves in prison because of alcohol and addiction, drug addiction. And so, you know, I was really gratified and pleased when I heard that they're distributing that book in the prisons. You know,
you tell a very moving story of wandering the streets of Edinburgh. Perhaps you could just share that.
So that was many years ago. It was. I mean, I was a young man. I was still drinking. I was maybe 23, and I was living a very sad life, really. you know. So I spent my time sitting in pubs or wandering between pubs. Not even, there was nothing social about it. You know, I wasn't going out to meet friends. I was just sitting in pubs drinking and self-medicating, really, you know, and wandering between pubs. And a very sad and kind of lonely existence for a 23-year-old, you know. And on one of those occasions, I found myself walking along George Street and, in Edinburgh, and I was walking past I think it's St Andrew's Church. But, you know, I knew the life I was living was wrong. I knew I wasn't happy, and I knew alcohol was a problem. But I didn't really. I knew that when I started to drink alcohol, I lost all power regarding how much I drank. You know. And but I was walking along, and the church was there, but it was closed. The doors were closed. But on there's a few steps up to that church. It's a beautiful building, and there's big pillars, big Corinthian pillars, and a great big door, and then a few steps up. And I was standing there, and as I was walking past the church, but as I was walking past, a man walked up onto those few steps. It was at Maghrib time, and he rolled out a prayer mat, and he took his shoes off, and he stood on, and he started to pray his Maghrib Salah. And I mean, I knew enough at the time to know that it was a Muslim, but I knew nothing about Islam. But I knew he was a Muslim, and I was standing at the bus stop. I was smoking a cigarette. I smoked at the time, and I was drunk, you know, and I was watching this guy praying, and it was just like, it really struck me. I thought, well, here's this man, and whatever he's doing, like, he knows. Like, he looked at his compass, and he'd aligned his prayer mat, and I thought, this guy knows something. This guy has something, and that is completely missing in my life, you know. And I'm completely lost, and this guy's not lost, you know. And I remember wanted when he finished his prayer, I wanted to speak to him. I really wanted to speak to him, but I was too ashamed. You know, I just felt too ashamed. And he rolled up his prayer mat, and he carried on his way, and then I just went back to the pub, you know. But it never left me. It was like it stayed there in my mind, and for years after that. Every so often it would come back, you know. And that was my experience. So my journey to Islam took a long time, you know.
Slow burner.
Yeah, absolutely. It took a long time, and I kept pushing it away, and it would come back in a different form, you know. I mean, I first met Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murat, who some people may know. I first met him like 18 years ago, and I used to go and visit him regularly, but it was only 7, 8 years ago that I accepted Islam. So I kept pushing it away, and it kept coming back, you know. But it was experiences like that.
Yeah, I was really touched by that, and it's a real lesson to all of us. Who, you know, just that act, that person in his own, you know, he was in his own zone and he was praying, but you don't know what effect those small things, the effect that small actions, or seemingly small actions that we do can have on people on the wasteland, whether it be praying in public. That's one example. It could be an act of charity. It could be something you just don't know what, you know, and you think, oh, it has. And you think someone who do things we think, I think this had no effect, but like 25 years later, something clicks. You know, we want short term. We want like short term results. We want who's taking the shahada, it's something you might, one small act that you've done, small word that you said. 25 years later, it yields some kind of fruit. So it's important to remember how God works. God works in mysterious ways.
Well, we were talking earlier on, and again, it's the other way around. But I was in this masjid a few years ago to pray during the day. I was in town, and I don't live in Edinburgh at the moment, but I was in town, and it was prayer time, so I came to pray. And it wasn't the congregational Jummah prayer, it was time to pray. And I walked in the door, and there was a big like a rucksack with plastic bags and all sorts of stuff. And in the middle, right in the middle of the masjid, there was a homeless guy, and he was drunk, and he was kind of wailing. He was in a terrible state, and obviously very distressed. But he was kind of wailing and like begging for some sort of relief, some help. And I was really touched, because there was not one. There were a few brothers praying and talking, and nobody harassed this guy. Nobody pushed him out of the mosque, you know. And who knows? You know, who knows? Maybe that guy will get sober, and maybe he'll come back here because of that experience, because he wasn't chased out of the mosque, you know. But we just don't know. Inshallah, that could happen.
Maybe moving on to the God of the Wild Places. So this book, it's Power of Adventure. It's called The Power of Adventure, and it comes out of, I guess, this journey that you're on, and this discontentment with the rat race, with the kind of just the standard, the day-to-day stuff, and just not feeling any real meaning to things. Just trying to discover yourself. And that led you to these adventures. Would that be right?
Do you know, it's the more I think about it, the more I realise those two books are very related. Although one's specifically talking about addiction, it's it talks about that kind of, you have to be broken. And you have to, you know, for me it was alcohol, and I had to get myself in a state. Even by the age of 25, I was completely broken, and I just couldn't do it anymore, you know. And then that process of recovery, of getting better, and it's the God of the Wild Places. They're going out to do these extreme events, and I mean, we're not talking about 26-mile marathons. We're talking about like the 150 miles is the marathon they start in the desert, you know, 110 miles in the Yukon, -40, you know, and it's this real. Why was it doing that? You know, it was only kind of half formed in my head while I was doing it, but it's the same thing. It was that getting to that point of brokenness, right? Because when you're out there and it's -40, I was out there, it was -40, I was on my own, I was in the middle of a forest, halfway up a mountain in the Yukon, and there's wolves in the forest, and bears, and you know, and I thought, get off from a council estate in Edinburgh, what am I doing here? But it was to do with that, like, being broken, you know, and when you're broken like that, when you know that you're absolutely at the edge of your endurance, it clears away all the nonsense, all the noise of the world just goes, and you're left with yourself. I was left with myself and Allah, you know, and there's everything else, all the stuff that doesn't matter is stripped away, and you're left with the truth, you know. And that's why I was doing it, because that's what I needed. But for me, there was so much, the nafs had covered everything up so much that I needed that kind of extreme to clear it all away and to break it. And I don't think everybody.
So I was going to say, do we all have to? Does everyone have to do that?
But it's the same idea. It's like for me, I think it's just that for me, I was so kind of lost in that lower aspect of the nafs that I needed these kind of. For me, I needed to really go to extremes to break it, and yeah, and it was part of that journey, that kind of really kind of being willing to go beyond my kind of what's comfortable.
Some really beautiful, I mean, it's beautifully told. Paul has a real gift of telling the story. I'm going to just read that paragraph
From the
just that one. Just it gives you an idea. This is on the Sahara.
Okay, this is in the Sahara ultra marathon. I waddle along towards the back of the now strung out pack. My gait is somewhere between a fast walk and a slow shuffling jog. I probably look like some small overburdened dung beetle in sharp contrast with the gazelles, greyhounds and whippets who have now disappeared into the distance because there was a lot of real elite athletes there, you know, and I wasn't. I may not be as graceful. I may not be graceful as I shuffle along with my Bergen weighing in at almost a third of my 58-kilogram body weight, but my heart is filled with magnificent elation. Where did you want to?
Yeah, that's it. That's for the end of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with a magnificent elation, I feel big.
I feel big.
Because I'd always been the kid at school who was like the wee guy, you know, the wee skinny guy who was rubbish at football, you know. And when you go to I go to school on a council estate in Edinburgh, not being good at football was like a massive handicap. You know? It's just like my brothers were brilliant football players, but I was useless. You know? So for me to be there and amongst all that was really kind of really huge experience for me.
And something you talk about is this idea of men or boys not having it in our modern life, in our modern world, men or boys not having this initiation. They don't go through some issues. They never really grow up. They never really become true men, so to speak. That's something you felt that was lacking, and you went all out to find that and to experience that.
Yeah, I became conscious of that. That was part of the problem. That there's no in like traditional societies, there are formal processes for bringing boys to adult male, to manhood, to bringing them from boy psychology to man psychology. And I became aware when I was still probably in my 30s. I became aware that was something that was really missing, particularly in the West. The boys were just left to to bring themselves to adulthood. Now it wasn't working. I mean, if you look at like gang culture, that's part of what's happening there. Is there's this craving in the boys for initiation, to be brought to manhood, but the men are not taking responsibility for doing it. So the boys are trying to initiate one another, and then this is where you get these gang initiations, and they've not got the maturity or the psychological or spiritual maturity to make that work. So it's causing all sorts of problems, and it's like say gang culture is a massive problem. You know that I don't know if you watched the Lord of the Rings films. Right? There's a beautiful initiatory moment in one of those films. I think it's in the middle of the film. There's this big battle that's about to happen. Helm's Deep, I think, the Battle of Helm's Deep. And they're massively outnumbered. And to the extent that they're having to get the boys to fight as well as the men, alongside the men. And there's a beautiful scene where there's a boy standing with a sword, and he's terrified. He's obviously terrified. Right? The sword's about the same size as him, you know. And then Aragorn, who represents the kind of warrior king archetype, is standing watching this boy. Right? And he looks at him, and he sees the boy's fear. And he watches him for a little while, and he goes over to the boy and he says, "Give me your sword." And the boy hands over the sword. Yeah? And Aragorn takes the sword and he swings the sword and he tests the sword, you know. And he hands it back to the boy, and And he looks the boy straight in the eye and he said, "This is a good sword." You know, and it's such a beauty. It makes it, honestly, every time I see it, it really moves me. Because what he's saying, and what I think what we need to do as men for the boys, what he's saying to the boy is, this is a good sword. I think what that represents is you have what it takes. You have what it takes to be a man, you know, and to stand beside the boy, you know. You have what it takes. This is a good sword, you know. And I think that's what we need to do as men for the boys in our community, is to let them know that they have what it takes to be men, to believe in them, and to walk beside them, you know, and to be willing to guide them. And it's a huge responsibility, but it's one that we'll have to, I believe, we'll have to take on.
And what would that look like? I mean, what are we missing as you know, with our children, or what kind of initiation could there be without swords, or with swords?
No, it's like
with arrows.
It's about providing. You know, it's Sheikh. I was really fortunate to spend quite a bit of time with Sheikh Babakir Ahmed in Cricklewood Mosque in London, and he talks a lot about until boys are 7 years old, and this comes from the prophetic tradition. You know, until boys are 7 years old, what you do is you love them, and you love them and you care for them, and you play with them, and then from 7 to kind of 14, 15, you teach them, and so that's to do with boundaries. It's to do with discipline, you know, and then after that, you walk beside them. You accompany them on the journey. So that is a kind of initiatory arc. But I think for me, the absolute core of it is to see them, not to ignore them, or to let them just get on with it and bring themselves up and try and work out how to be men on their own. It's like walking beside them and showing them and teaching them and believing in them.
Giving them responsibility.
Yeah, and giving them responsibility and a kind of understanding that those boundaries, that they're not just random, they're there, and that is, we have everything we need to take that journey together, you know.
And another of your interests is storytelling, and we already heard some of that, but I think that's really important. Perhaps something which is that all great teachers are great storytellers. The Prophet Muhammad himself, and all his, you know, those who follow in his footsteps, have this ability to you know, bring a story to life and convey something in that story, a message which just saying it in kind of black and white won't necessarily. So it's something you used in your teaching, in your work, and your teaching.
That's what I do. But it's
but exploring Scottish stories, and
but I mean, also good stories, and there are a lot of fine stories in the Islamic tradition. But see, what story does is it presents a pattern. It's like you can give somebody just facts. You can tell them the facts, and some of those facts might stick, and some of them. But if you tell somebody a really good story, a story that's rich and multi-layered, what you're doing is you're giving them a pattern through which they can respond to the world, and it's a flexible pattern. So, you know, I use a story in the book about alcoholism. It's from the 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights, and it's. I think it is a metaphor. Like, or it can be seen, one of its readings can be seen as a metaphor for addiction and the kind of that powerlessness.
Tell the story.
It's not a long story. See, I think this. I mean, I could talk to you about addiction, but to tell you this story might give you more of an insight into the experience of somebody who is addicted to whatever they're addicted to. an old inn by the harbour, a small but attentive audience hang on every word, as Sinbad, the sailor, relates the story of his 5th voyage. On this voyage, for the first time, Sinbad is not a mere deckhand or sailor, but captain of his own ship. He has assembled a crew of merchants from all the countries of the known world and filled his hold with a rich cargo of goods to be traded. After many weeks at sea, the travellers begin to run low on supplies and soon despair of their hunger and thirst. Just when all seems lost, a cry comes from the crow's nest. "Land ahoy!" Boats are lowered and the crew make for the sandy shore. Soon they quench their thirst on fresh water and set to searching for food. Before long, the crew discover a gigantic egg, 10 times the size of an ostrich egg. Sinbad knows that this is the egg of the roc, a huge, ferocious bird he encountered on a previous voyage, and warns his crew to leave the egg and return to the ship. The crew obey the order to return to ship, but in their desperation refuse to relinquish the egg. Once aboard ship and having sailed what they think to be a safe distance from the island, they begin to hack at the egg with their swords, splitting it in two. The yolk inside pouring out on the deck. It is then that a great shadow falls over the deck, and the crew cower at the sight of the mother roc. Her cries of anguished fury strike terror into their hearts as the great bird drops heavy rocks onto the ship, splintering its masts like twigs and crashing through its hull. Soon the ship, with all its cargo and crew, is at the bottom of the sea. Only Sinbad survives, clinging desperately to a drifting piece of wreckage. In this way, at the mercy of the current, he drifts for how many days he cannot tell. Then, in the distance, he spots an island, and with the strength which remains to him, he kicks towards that island. As he draws close, he sees that this island appears as a paradise. It is green and lush, with trees bearing delicious fruit and streams of crystal clear water. The fruits of the trees hang low, within easy reach. As Sinbad walks up the beach towards a gentle stream of clear, cool water, he spies an old man. The old man stands by the stream, pointing towards the fruit trees. He says nothing, but seems to indicate to Sinbad that he wants help to get across the stream. Sinbad sees that the stream is shallow and easily crossed, and that the old man is frail and in need of his help. He lifts the old man onto his shoulders and begins to wade across the stream to where the fruit awaits. But no sooner do they reach the other side, but the old man tightens his legs around Sinbad's throat. No matter how much Sinbad fights and struggles, the old man's legs never let go of their iron grip, until Sinbad can fight no more. From that moment on, the old man forces Sinbad to carry him around the island, across rivers, over mountains, through thorny forests. If he complains or refuses to do the old man's bidding, the old man tightens his vice grip around Sinbad's throat until he is forced to comply. Sinbad realizes he is enslaved to the old man's will, and that the old man will work him to his death. He resolves to trick the old man. Sinbad gathers grapes and herbs and mixes them in a gourd. He drinks the mixture every day, and the old man observes that it seems to make Sinbad's tasks easier and bring him good cheer. The old man demands that Sinbad makes the mixture up for him to try, but Sinbad ensures that the drink he makes for the old man is much more potent. It makes the old man's head swim and drains him of strength. The old man, who is in fact a demon, loses his strength and loosens his grip around Sinbad's throat. Sinbad seizes his opportunity, kills the demon, and runs to the shore, where he is rescued by a passing ship. Sinbad is safe again, but he has lost his ship and his fortune. On the way back home, the ship stops off at a strange island, where the crew intend to gather coconuts to sell when they return. But the trees are too high to climb. Sinbad has an idea and instructs the crew to throw stones at the monkeys who sit high in the coconut trees. The monkeys are enraged by this, but have no stones to throw back. Instead, they begin to throw coconuts, which are easily gathered from the beach by the crew of the ship. Sinbad is given his share of the spoils and returns home wealthy again. He gives away his new wealth to a poor porter in the harbour, and that porter returns each night to the inn to hear more stories of Sinbad's adventures. So, it's like I say, I could talk to you about addiction, but the idea that a Sinbad enslaved, you know, there's so much in that story. It's like the greed, the impulsivity of the crew, you know, in their desperation, they break open the egg and the ship is destroyed. You know, and I think the ship is the metaphor for the body that you're going through life. You know, and then Sinbad lost at sea. You know, that's how I felt walking along George Street that day. You know, lost in this sea that was just dictating where I went. I wasn't making any decisions. I was just being taken with the current wherever it took me. You know, and then the island it appears a paradise. You know, the low-hanging fruit. You know, that alcohol is the easy solution to the problem. You know, and then but then alcohol exerts its vice grip and enslaves the individual. You know, and until that kind of final rock bottom. And then the idea of giving away his wealth at the end of the story is very important, I think, because in order to live that's the kind of sober, decent, wholesome life in the world, there has to be service. There has to be an attitude of service in order to maintain my own sort of spiritual, psychological well-being, and so that I don't need that relief. But service, to me, it seems to be very important. And like I say, a story can convey these things at a much deeper level.
Maybe that's what you guys will remember from this.
Yeah, stories.
You could go back and think about it. But I mean, there's lots more I want to ask. But if anyone has any questions, anything they wanted to ask before we kind of wrap up, please. The floor is open. Anyone interested? Yeah.
Wa alaikum salam.
I came a bit late. I don't know if you already mentioned that part in your story. I can tell that there's been kind of a constant fight with the issue you're just through your journey. But it looked like each time you had the desire or the motivation to keep fighting. It looked like you did not say, oh, you know, that's it, it's done, or I have no way of just overcoming it, so it is what it is. But it looked like you wanted to do like going to like this marathon or whatever you do, always trying to just get yourself back on track somehow. I'm wondering, where did you get this motivation from? What was motivating you? And the second question is like, with Islam, you say you keep pushing it back, and what was the trigger? When did you actually say, that's it, you know, I will become Muslim, basically?
So that's an interesting question. I think what was the motivation? The motivation was pain. You know, it was just I couldn't. The way I was living my life just wasn't working. Even after I stopped drinking alcohol. I stopped drinking alcohol when I was 25 years old because I just couldn't do it anymore. And but there was something else. I needed something else. That wasn't the end of the story. You know, it's everything. When I look back, I can see that everything was leading me towards Islam. And it wasn't, once I kind of realised that, it's in a sense, it's the giving up of the fight. Because if I'm fighting, I'm making an assumption that I have somehow have the power to fight. And I didn't have that power. And I had to submit to the fact that I didn't have that power. And I had to submit to Allah. I'm trying to think like what was the final kind of. I think it just became apparent to me that, you know, why did I just keep pushing this away when it just seemed so obvious, and just this kind of moment of clarity, and that, you know, why am I fighting? Why don't I just submit? Because the successes in my life had always been when I'd reached that point of submission and kind of the nafs, that lower aspect of the nafs had been broken. So I just, in the end, I went up to an Islamic retreat with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad up in Norfolk and accepted Islam that day. And that was about 7 years ago, after many years of trying to deny the truth. You know. So, does that answer your question? Thank you.
It shows also the importance of having those guides, the sheikhs, the people of wisdom who patiently point, show the way, but there's no pressure to in your own time.
Yeah, I'm so grateful now when I look back and I can see just how blessed I've been in the guidance and the generosity of these wonderful men who gave me their time, you know. And you see patience, because this went on for years, years and years, asking questions, you know. They're never turned away, not once, you know. Blessed.
Something that really shines through for me as well, sorry I'm hogging the mic, is the fact that when we become Muslim, it's often seen you have to adopt this. I changed my name, for example. Change your name, change your identity, wear different clothing, assume this new identity. And I think the fact that you had such a long journey coming to know knowing who you were, being proud of who you were, and then Islam came. Some perhaps for younger people, it's more you're adopting a new identity. But to emphasize that when you become Muslim, you don't have to make this huge change. You're really actually going back to discover who you are and being proud of that and seeing the good in that.
It was like, for me, it was stripping away all the false identities and getting back to the truth about who I actually am. And that is, I'm a Muslim, you know. My identity is one who submits to Allah. You know, that's the core identity. So the rest is all just.
But also having pride in you talked about your Pringle. Yeah. The Pringles were warriors in the borders, and being proud of that, and not
you don't have to discard.
You have to discard that. So I was saying you don't have to. But when you become Muslim, you're not asked to throw away everything and start from zero, from nothing. You're embracing what you already have.
Yeah. And it's logic. If Islam is the truth, and I believe it is, then anything that's true will be compatible with Islam.
What impact did your early years in your sort of parents have in your upbringing and your character and your sort of journey? In terms of when you're growing up in that household with the sort of models and other elements as well that you said.
Yeah, my dad was obviously because he died recently. I'm thinking a lot, particularly about my dad. My mum, this is true of my mum as well. But my dad was he was a good man. He was a decent man. He lived a life that was congruent with his faith. He was willing to stand up and be counted as a religious man. And so I grew up seeing that kind of courage. It was a courageous thing to do in a secular society, to stand up and say, "This is what I believe." And he did that, and he was willing to stand. He was willing, like when various kind of religious groups turn up at the door, and like most people, they open the door and think, and they say, "No thanks," and they close the door. And my dad never did that when I was growing up. If these religious groups that come to the door came to our door, he would say, "Aye, in you come," and he'd sit them down and he'd give them a cup of tea and he would argue with them. He would argue with them, and he would spend hours doing this, But my point being, he knew what he believed. He was a religious man. He knew what he believed. He was willing and able to defend his beliefs robustly. And as a boy, to witness that in my father was a great thing. I saw that kind of courage. I saw the importance of standing by what you believe in. And that's why I believe that's one of the reasons why I was able to stop drinking alcohol at such a young age. Because what it did is it gave me a measure of how far away I'd moved from what was right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that answers the question.
Yeah, it's like a kind of, it's your moral compass.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. And I think as a boy growing up with that example was really helpful for me. And subsequently I met, like I said, the men that I met, the Muslim men that I met, the guides that I had, they kind of represented that same kind of energy, you know. Hi.
Thank you. I'm interested in kind of the recovery and the healing from the addiction over years. And particularly, how did you deal with kind of the feelings of guilt or shame or kind of self-loathing that comes along with addiction? What was kind of that healing journey?
And that's a very good question, because there is a lot of that, especially when you one of the alcohol, when you drink alcohol, it inflates that lower nafs, you know, and it suppresses the growth of the spirit, you know, it definitely does that. And so if you stop, when I stopped drinking alcohol, you're left with the kind of, like, you know, like you often hear the expression, if you got a fruit cake with alcohol in it, and you remove the alcohol, you're still left with a fruit cake, you know. So there was a lot of work to be done when I actually stopped, and but that's why I think this 12-step process interests me, and the kind of parallels with the kind of the Islamic principles which kind of inform the 12 steps. It's very easy for me to see the parallels, and there was an actual methodical, formal process for dealing with all that stuff, for making amends, for seeking forgiveness where it was necessary, for putting things right, that, you know, putting right the damage that had been done, you know. And so there's what's the expression? Muhasabah al-nafs, an examination of the nafs, to really kind of to see where to recognise and acknowledge my character defects, my shortcomings, you know. Character defects are those things perhaps that I do that I shouldn't do. Shortcomings are things that I don't do that I should do. You know, to have a clear picture of who I really am, what I'd really become, rather than what I think I am or what I want other people to think I am. The truth, to really see that, and then out of that, it will become apparent where I need to make amends, where I need to put things right, where I have actually harmed people, you know, or institutions, you know. So yeah, I think for me it was important that there was a formal process, and I had guides in that process, wise people who travelled that journey before, you know. Again, it's almost, it parallels that conversation about initiation, to have a guide to take you through a process, you know. Yeah, I think it was important to have a formal process for addressing these things. For me, it was.
I think we're coming to an hour now. After this, the Paul will be downstairs. So anyone wants to come and meet. Did you bring copies of the book?
That is, I've got a few copies.
So if everyone wants to carry on conversation, we'll be downstairs in the library, and we have some copies of the book there as well. But I want to just finish by reading the last 2 or 3 chapters, 4 paragraphs from you. Yeah. Just kind of sums up everything.
I have come truly to believe that it is possible to move towards this reality. I did not have to accept the role assigned to me. It didn't fit. In truth, it was me who was holding on to that ill-fitting identity, that erroneous limiting perception of who I was and what I was capable of. The anxieties and uncertainties of a rapidly changing world have generated a corresponding spiritual hunger. I believe men need adventure, but without a sacred, transpersonal mission, without the spiritual jihad against the ego, moving beyond self to the place of connection with all that is, no adventure will ever be enough in the ongoing search for soul. For me, the true source of my longing, though I didn't know it, was the beloved, and it was in submission to the divine will in my life that I embarked upon the road of peace. I have a long way to travel on that road, with much to learn, but I have a deep sense that I am now facing the right way. If I may speak directly, I earnestly encourage you to cut loose from what anchors you, to steer a course out of the harbour in which you shelter and risk the wild sea. Seek the unexplored continent of your purpose, and inshallah it will find you. Give words to your mission and dare to live by those words. The world needs your gift, don't withhold it. The world needs heroes more than ever before.
That's a very beautiful ending to that book and to this meeting. Thank everyone. Thank you, Paul, first of all. Thank everyone for. And it's nice to see so many faces, and you know, it deserves more. It deserves more conversations. But it's been very enlightening. I'm sure everyone's taken something from your experience and from your just honesty, just complete, unapologetic honesty with yourself, and that's something we can all learn from. We often put up barriers and we create our own kind of personas, but it's very uplifting to hear this. And may Allah bless your journey. We look forward to meeting you many times as well in the future, and your family and everyone. So that's our first lecture of this, or first meeting of this encounter series. So next Saturday we have Lindsay Kayla from Glasgow coming to talk about her life and her experience and her journey in faith and in activism. And the following Saturday we have Yahya Burt, who is a historian. He's very interested in British Islamic history. What is British Islamic history? We actually have a long history of Islam in Britain, which he's researched. I don't even think it exists beyond a few decades, but it's a very interesting story he's been researching. And the Sunday after that, which is the 20th, the last day of this, we'll have his wife, actually, his name is Fozia Bora. She's a lecturer in history, so she's going to talk about the Crusades, which is the often misunderstood chapter in history where the East met the West met the East and clashed, and so she's going to be talking about that. And every day the mosque is open. Please invite friends, invite family. On the not tomorrow, the next Sunday and the Sunday after, we have a cultural day where we have food being served, and we have storytelling, and we have some calligraphy taking place. So it's really, we're trying to just do our best to make this place as open as possible, and invite people. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Allah bless you. Ask Allah for guidance. Ask Allah for goodness. Ask Allah for light. Ask Allah for understanding, for insight, that we come to know ourselves. The one who knows himself knows his Lord. That's what we try and what we learn, inshallah, from this. Allah increases in knowledge, increases in insight, and Allah bless us and unite us and guide us and guide by us. And peace and blessings upon Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.